Welcome back to Boilers Extra in the wee hours of the morning here at Lucas Oil Stadium. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indy Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier, 4 a.m., where we are currently.
4 a.m. So this will be a brief Boilers Extra, the briefest of Boilers Extra. 62-60 Houston final. Just a tremendous college basketball game. I think that's mostly what we're going to focus on here. There's going to be more to be talked about as far as what comes next for Purdue. Matt Painter said there's meetings happening with players this weekend. He's already visited one potential transfer target. They've got one visiting this weekend. There's going to be more to discuss as all of that comes together. But I think we're just going to focus on this game tonight, which was in every way but the final result, I think, everything that Purdue wanted from this game.
And I think, did we do one of these yesterday? I think so.
We did, yes.
And I said, like,
no, 2 days ago.
Okay. Well, I remember saying last week, I thought there was no way Purdue was going to win this game. The more that I watched Houston, learned about Houston, the more I started to talk myself into Purdue could compete with this team. I thought the guard play really could counter what Houston tried to do defensively. And sure enough, Braden Smith dissected Houston's defense to the tune of, 15 assists, had assisted on all 11 field goals in the second half. Purdue absolutely did everything it could to win this game. And sometimes when you're playing a juggernaut team like that, you still have to make the play at the end. And sure enough, Houston made one more play than the Boilermakers.
Yeah, the way I wrote it was that, like, not every defeat is a failure. This wasn't like a failure. Purdue didn't play a perfect game, but it certainly forced Houston into an imperfect version of what it has done this season, winning now 29 of its last 30 games. And there were so many ways that I thought Purdue answered deficiencies that had been there throughout the season, maybe especially during that stretch where they lose 6 out of 9 games. And one of the ways was we should just start with Braden Smith. 15 assists tonight, 11 assists on 11 field goals for the team in the second half, which is, I don't know that I've ever heard of that, although it was 20 assists on 21 field goals for the game for Purdue against the best defensive team in the country, and one that specifically came out and really pinched him off and was not going to let him beat them. He took 7 shots, although really it's 6, and then the heave at halftime. There have only been a few games this season where he's only taken like 4, 5, 6 shots, and a lot of them were early in the season. They weren't games where they needed him to shoot the ball. You would have thought maybe this was a game where they were going to need him to shoot the ball, and in the other games this season when teams have taken him away, even though he's had some big assist games, I felt like in the biggest games of the year when an opponent could take him away, there wasn't a response. He wasn't able to facilitate the way he wanted to for the most part, or they weren't getting the production from other places in the offense. And tonight, those things happened.
Yeah, very much so. And I thought Trey Kaufman-Renn also, one of the things we talked about the other day, being a good decision maker. He didn't force things. He took some shots that he normally makes that didn't go in, but that's just, kind of a product of Houston being really good defensively. I thought the team made, for the most part, good decisions. Now, you can nitpick one here, one there. There's probably 4 or 5 instances. I know after the game, TJ Cox kind of was hard on himself and said, I made some mental mistakes at times. Those happen over the course of a game. And when you lose by 2, it's easy to pinpoint, that could have been the difference. But really, I think that Purdue played its best basketball game in a long, long time.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about that. And listen, yeah, they made some mistakes because Houston forces you to make mistakes. Guess who else made some mistakes tonight? Houston did. Like I said, they didn't play a perfect game either by any stretch. And I thought Trey Kaufman-Renn, Houston came in, and I thought if you were to go ask them, I think they have to be pretty happy with what they did against Smith to some extent. Maybe not so much in the second half because he did. He only had 4 assists at halftime. It was really the second half where he kind of came alive there. But especially on Kaufman-Renn, like forcing him, they were letting him get the ball in the high post, and then that was often as far as they were going to let him go. They were not letting him get those low post scoring opportunities. He really had to fight for the few of those that he got. I mean, 5 of 12 is not the efficiency that he's more of like a 60% field goal shooter for the season. So that's not where he's usually at, and that was a product of the way Houston handled that. But again, a couple of assists, and I thought the difference in this game was Fletcher Lawyer came out at the start, and one of the buzzwords that this team has brought up a lot is energy. Like it's something that they talked about through that whole stretch where they weren't winning, and like where's the energy coming from? We have to create our own energy when we're on the road and all those things. And he, I thought, was supplying the energy. He was waving his arms to get the crowd pumped up before the game. Every time he'd hit a three, he was like waving, gesturing to the crowd and
The
getting the
and
home
one that he
crowd in
had.
it. Yeah, the and one where he's like pumping his fist. Like I thought he was a big source of energy in the first half. He scored 16, but 12 of them came in the first half. And when they were limiting Smith and Coffin Wren, it's supposed to open things up for him, and he took advantage of it. Better than he did against McNeese State, by the way. He took 10 threes against McNeese State. He could only hit 3 of them, and sometimes shots just don't fall or whatever. But I thought tonight, even in a kind of a smaller, more efficient, just what he was doing early this season, I thought, just being like an uber efficient player.
Yeah, and then I think at halftime, only those three and CJ Cox maybe were the guys who had scored.
Yeah.
And then I thought in the second half, you really saw Miles Colvin emerge as the guy that could hit shots for you. Cam Heidi obviously hit what at one point seemed like it was going to be the biggest shot of the season to tie the game with 35 seconds to go. Other guys played their parts well. Miles Colvin became a guy that had to be on the court. Cam Heidi was the guy that had to be on the court because they were so productive. And it's not it's at the expense of somebody, but it's not because somebody else isn't playing well. It's just they had so many guys that performed well, and you have to match up with what Houston is. A lot of good comes out of this. Now, that could all change depending on what the roster looks like going forward, and we'll get down to that down the road. But this was a very promising thing for a team that could theoretically come back basically looking the exact same next year with a couple of additions.
I kind of thought that maybe you start to kind of project, like, how do you think this game's going to turn out? And I went into it thinking like this was maybe the narrative would be like Purdue got one final look at like a final reminder of what a elite team looks like, and maybe they aren't there yet. Like they just couldn't consistently play with teams like this away from Mackey Arena. You can go back to when they beat Alabama early this season, but they had the crowd at their back that night, and anybody who was there knows how much of an impact that made that night. They beat Ole Miss in San Diego, but that was in a neutral site, but a very Purdue heavy crowd that night. They win at Oregon, but that was a very up and down team this season, and I would not call them an elite kind of team. But they beat 4 Sweet 16 teams this season. They had proven they could get on the field and beat that level of team, but it had been a long time since they had beaten. I think they came into the season thinking this was the kind of team that they would consistently be able to play with and beat, and that eluded them for most of the season. And then tonight, they almost get there. And the thing that kept coming up tonight, there were players who were talking about it. Maybe it was because Matt Painter had talked about it right after the game, but then Matt Painter is also talking about it to us. That December 21st trip to Alabama to play Auburn, where they just got pulverized. It was like 72-39 at the peak of that, and they made it closer at the end. But there was no question that like Purdue barely belonged on the court with them that night. Like Auburn just ran them out of town, and that night Painter said that he told the players, like, that's okay, now you've seen it, like that's what you're going to have to beat if you want to get to an Elite Eight and go deeper than the Sweet 16. Like he had told them, Ole Miss, that's the level team you're going to have to beat again to get to the Sweet 16, which actually turned out not to be true. They didn't have to beat McNeese State, beat a 5 seed to get there, but I wouldn't say that they were the level of an Ole Miss. Who was still playing after tonight. I believe that did they beat Michigan State?
They did not.
Tonight? They did not. Okay, so a team that could have still been playing at this late of the season, and then they almost closed the gap. Like they saw what they were going to have to do, and I think if you had asked us when they were going through that stretch where they just were really scuffling late in the season, I don't know that you would have given them a great chance to have a chance to win this game at the end, and yet they did.
This is kind of leads into what I ended up writing, probably not as eloquently as I thought I would because it's 4 a.m. But it seemed like every time somebody started to write off Purdue, whether that's Zach Edey's gone, Mason Gillis transfers, whatever it is, then in your Purdue starts 8-4, people start to think, okay, this isn't the same team as a year ago. Purdue gets blown out by Marquette, Penn State, and Auburn in the span of a month. okay, this is different. And then Purdue goes on a long winning streak and then loses 4 in a row, loses 6 of 9 entering the tournament. People again start to be like, well, okay, Purdue's falling off. Every time that happened, Purdue showed you why you shouldn't write that team off. And tonight was kind of the cap on that. Even though it ends in a loss, I think Purdue showed, at its peak, it can be one of the top teams in college basketball.
The one thing it couldn't solve was rebounding. And it looked like they may have done it last weekend, but again, they beat up on High Point and McNeese State. That wasn't Houston. Houston is just a much more physical team than that. They're a more talented team than that, and they end up winning this game because of offensive rebounding. They outscored Purdue 20-9 on second chance points. There was nothing else Purdue did in any of their avenues that was able to equate that, and so it ends up being a 2-point game. But that was just too much of a disadvantage for them to climb back from. They really hammered them in the first half, I thought, a couple times on just crashing the boards against those smaller lineups. However, Houston had an 18-6 advantage on second chance points, so they tripled them up until Trakoff and Wren gets an offensive rebound, kicks it out to Braden Smith. Camden Heide, I was talking to him after the game. He said, I was just kind of hanging out on the block, and then I decided I better get the hell out of there. So he comes out to the corner. That was a good exact quote. It comes out to the corner. Braden Smith hits him. And I thought it was just our job. Like, we looked for like the narratives, and like it was kind of coming full circle, because I remember starting this season and talking to Camden Heide about like, hey, why are you kind of like a little bit like gun shy? Like, why are you sort of pulling your punches on some of these shots? And we were talking to him just a couple weeks ago. There were some instances of that, and not there. Like, he got the ball, puts it up on a fallback three as the shot clock is going off, and it goes through. And it looks at that moment like maybe Purdue had pulled it out, like it was going to have the miracle finish that they'd been chasing for so long.
Yeah, and the quote I kept resurfacing on Twitter in recent weeks about Cam Heide was talking to PJ Thompson during the stretch where he was struggling to hit threes. So then he just started to not shoot threes when he had open ones. And PJ Thompson said, I'm not worried about it because he'll come through when we need him to. And sure enough, even though Houston does get the last second shot, he was there. He hit 2 big threes late in this game. Obviously, the one that most people will remember is the one that tied the game. But that's just, I think that kind of talks about what this program is, and this confidence in everybody to keep doing your job, keep plugging away. They talk a lot of times about if you've missed a lot of shots in a row, you've got a lot of makes coming. Necessarily doesn't always work out that way, but Purdue is what it is, and it's just kind of really bought into this philosophy and seems really unified. And Matt Painter has really built this program to be something special in an era where a lot of teams just rebuild teams every single year on the fly. He's got kind of a great thing here as a program where you can plug in those role players and they can come through you in the clutch. And sometimes you might need them for 30 minutes. Sometimes you might need them for 5, but they buy into it.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to take a couple guys down this line of thinking earlier tonight in the locker room. Pretty somber locker room, but I thought some of the guys were talking pretty eloquently. I was talking to Miles Colvin, I was talking to Camden Heide, and just saying like, kind of getting a feel for, each of these seasons gets judged individually, but for all of these guys, it's just a chapter in a longer story. They were all around for last year, and that, well, some of them were here 2 years ago for that season, and the elation and heartbreak that they experienced during that season. They're all still, everyone here was, except for the freshmen, were around for last year's run and getting all the way to the national championship game. And then this year is like the bridge to what everybody saw at the end of last season was like, well, this is still a very young team. Imagine what it can do in 2 years when it kind of fully forms together into whatever its new identity is. And I don't think, we've talked before, and I brought it up a couple times, that like sometimes like that team that you think is going to be great next year, by the time they get to the end of the year before that, it clicks. And you wonder what this team could have done. Like, if they can avoid, if they win, if they don't go through that stretch that they did late in the year, and they get a slightly better seed, now they're playing somebody else instead of having to play Houston tonight. Does it get them one more week? I don't know. but I mean they did everything they could do almost to win this game. I think it was a team that, regardless of what anybody else thought of it, kind of speaking to what you're talking about, like just what they've accomplished on an annual basis now, they have their own like very lofty internal standards. Like this is what Purdue basketball is. We should be winning the Big Ten championship. We should be beating the best teams in the country. And they weren't checking those boxes as consistently as they wanted to this year. And this game was almost their answer to themselves. I think that they weren't wrong, that it was within them, and they just needed to find a way to get it out.
Yeah, and that's one of the things Miles Colvin said in his very. He's a quiet guy, but sometimes when he talks and you really listen to him, he says these like very useful quotes, and one of them was like, "We found out tonight," or "We found out that we are one of the best teams in college basketball." And I think it did take 35 games probably to figure that out, but you theoretically could bring back everybody but Caleb Furst, add Antoine West. Matt Painter said he's going to add some guys through the transfer portal. It's there's just a lot of positives to come out of a negative outcome to how this game ended. I think that bodes well for Purdue possibly ending its season next year in Indianapolis as well.
I think it was something that I didn't appreciate until I started covering this team. The first year I covered was 2013-14, the team that lost its last 7 games and finished last in the Big Ten. And that was kind of a smack in the face, like, oh, wait, first of all, it's hard to make the Big Ten tournament or to make the national tournament. Like the next year, they were a 9 seed going down to Louisville to play Cincinnati. And so then it's like, oh, it's that hard to make the NCAA tournament. And then they were up by like 9 with a minute and something left to play, and they lose that game. And you're like, oh, it's that hard to win any NCAA tournament game. And by the time you get to this level, the second weekend, everybody is the best teams in the country, and everybody can play the kind of game that they deserve to win and still not win. And I think it stings tonight for this team, but I think that the experiences they've been through in the past can probably help them process it the right way and be the catalyst it can be going into the offseason. But this roster is going to change. Even if on paper everybody can come back, we know there are going to be some changes. We know Caleb Furst obviously isn't coming back. We know they're going to add through the portal just one person right off the bat. And then I think any attrition they do have, anybody who does leave, I think you're going to see additions there to help kind of fill out this roster. The one thing that Matt Painter said, and it relates kind of to this, losing this rebounding battle again. Like this team wasn't physical enough, and that was his fault. Like he didn't make this team physical enough, whether that's through how they approach things or whether that is through just the personnel. And so that's something that they can try to fix through the portal.
Funny anecdote about that, talking to Caleb Furst after the game, his jersey's torn from about the middle of the word Purdue to over by his shoulder. And he said, yeah, this happened when I got involved going for a rebound with Tuggle, and then I got called for the foul. And he's the one whose jersey is halfway ripped off. So it was a very, Houston is a very physical team, and I don't know that Purdue could have done much more to counter that. But that was one thing Matt Painter said after the game. We're going to get more physical. Trey Coppin-Wren, clearly a very physical player, imposes that, but you need that kind of team-wide. And I imagine that that's going to be one of the things that gets addressed in team meetings once those start come Monday.
Yeah, I mean, if they're just a little bit more physical, if they get one more box out and don't allow an offensive rebound, if they hit one more three, they were 8 of 27 from three. If they're 9 of 27 from three, which is still not where they want to shoot, still kind of subpar for them. But all of those things change the complexion of everything. So I think they're going to be shutting this down pretty soon. I think we need to head off. But thanks for joining us on Boilers Extra. A lot more news and everything, reaction coming on IndyStar.com and JCOnline.com. For Sam King, I'm Nathan Baird. We'll talk to you again soon.